Music Revolutionaries.
Hi. In week one, I described the history of sound recording. But there's another approach to recording music. One where the information about a performance, like notes, rhythms, loudness, is stored on a medium, while the information about sound is stored somewhere else. This leads to much smaller files because all that audio data is somewhere else and is only called up during playback. This idea isn't really all that new. From a technological point of view, music boxes, barrel organs, musical automata, and similar devices do this too. One device that was hugely popular in the 19th and 20th centuries was the player piano. The music is encoded on a strip of paper with holes cut in it. A pneumatic system sucks air through the holes, and this causes the piano to play. You might remember that in the early days of computing, programming was done on punch cards, a technology that goes way back to mechanical looms for weaving in the 18th century. It's not difficult to see how this applies to a computer, as it's a binary system. Either there's a hole or there isn't one. It's on or off, it's 1 or 0. A sophisticated version of the player piano, sometimes called the reproducing piano, can record the details of a live performance, notes, rhythms, use of pedals, and so forth. From the early 20th century, famous pianists began recording this way. The advantage was that you could listen to the performance on a real piano in your living room, therefore with much higher audio quality than you could get from cylinders and discs at the time. Some composers even wrote music for the player piano, like Igor Stravinsky, George Antheil, who used 16 electrically controlled pianos in his Ballet Mécanique, and also the wonderful Conlon Nancarrow, whose studies for player piano are among the greatest music of the 20th century. Australia's greatest musical revolutionary was the pianist and composer Percy Grainger. He was born in Melbourne, but he had close ties with Adelaide. And in fact, he's buried in a cemetery very close to where I am right now. He was a passionate advocate of the player piano, recording his own music on it, as well as other music like Grieg's famous piano concerto. Grainger was one of the most unusual and eccentric characters in the history of music. And let's face it, music history isn't exactly short of weird people. Percy Grainger was a short man with a shock of red hair about a foot high. He was very good looking, and while he was a child, his mother decided that he was a genius and did everything she could to nurture his precocious talent. His relationship with his mother is just one of many peculiarities of this extraordinary man, who used to walk or run from one concert to another. Wore clothing he designed himself made out of colourful toweling, had an unhealthy interest in whips, and spent most of his life living in the United States, but always maintained that he was an Australian composer. Now, the disadvantage with the player piano was that he could only play discrete notes on a keyboard, but Percy wanted a machine that could play the entire range of possible frequencies, like the theremin could. So he invented the free music machine. It was still controlled by a strip of paper, but now it was folded over to create what he called, in true Australian fashion, the kangaroo pouch system, which controlled the frequency of electronic oscillators. This was a revolutionary concept, very far ahead of its time. It was many years before similar automated music could be produced by computer systems. The concept embodied in the player piano and in Grainger's free music machine, that you could create a set of instructions for automated playing of music, which could be given to a machine to execute, with the machine containing the information needed to produce the sound. This eventually led to the development of MIDI. MIDI is a technical standard, including protocol and hardware, that allows computers and electronic musical instruments to talk to one another. MIDI emerged in the early 1980s as a rather rare example of competitors in the music industry collaborating to produce an industry standard that would be useful for all of them. Dave Smith and Chet Wood at Sequential Circuits, makers of the iconic Prophet 5 synthesizers, were instrumental in developing the MIDI standard. It came at exactly the right time, with personal computers, samplers and digital synthesizers all coming onto the market. This very rapidly transformed the music industry in the 1980s. You may be wondering what the connection is between the player piano and MIDI. But if you compare a piano roll and the way a MIDI sequencer appears on your computer screen, you'll see a close resemblance. The holes punched in the paper and the blocks in the sequencer timeline are both sets of instructions for a machine to execute to produce music. In both cases, the information content of the file or roll is actually very small. That's because the data about the sound, which is where most of the information in music is found, is not in the file but in the machine that executes the instructions. It's strange to think that a very old-fashioned technology like the player piano and a fundamental part of contemporary electronic music are not dissimilar in principle. MIDI has now been around for more than 30 years and is still an indispensable tool for many kinds of music making. But like all such things, it does have limitations, and those limitations restrict what kind of music can be made with MIDI devices. Now, just as Percy Grainger thought beyond the player piano to the revolutionary free music machine, no doubt MIDI will eventually be replaced with a new standard that will offer new possibilities. How far it goes will depend on commercial interest and how they are balanced with creative freedom. That's something that Percy Grainger didn't have to worry about.